Boker Tov, good morning everyone, all of our friends right here in Rechavia, Nachlaot, in Yerushalayim, and of course around the world, any time of day that you'll be watching this class on our YouTube channel. It is a true honor and pleasure to be able to learn together with you Tehillim. Today we're starting a new letter, the letter of Zion. Zion is the numerical value of 7, and we have the rule, Kol Hashvin Chavivin, all the 7th is the best. So we have some great teachings to share with you in this letter, the letter Zion. The next 8 verses, beginning with Pasuk Memtet, verse number 49. So let's begin with reading the verse inside. Memtet, Zechar davar la'avdecha. Remember the promise to your servant, Al Asher Yichaltani, through which you have given me hope. In other words, Hashem promised David HaMelech that he's going to protect him. So David HaMelech says, as far as I'm concerned, your promise keeps me going. It gives me hope. The fact that Hashem says everything will be okay, I will take care of you, that is enough to keep me going. Let's learn over here what Rabbi Yisroel says. Since you want me and you give me kiruv, you bring me close to you, you give me closeness, King David says to Hashem. So remember what you promised me. And don't forget about me. Don't allow me to be forgotten. And continue to protect me. It's interesting to note that the words that David HaMelech uses over here is mishpatecha. Zacharti mishpatecha, I remembered your laws. It's the same word as the name of this week's parsha, mishpatim, your laws. Because it comes right after the previous parsha of the Yitro that we read about the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, and now the Torah tells us many of the laws in this week's parsha. Mishpatim are those mitzvot which we understand with our logic. Chukim are those mitzvot that are beyond our logic. Eidot are those mitzvot that we can understand. So if the Torah would have not have told it to us, we may not have known about them. For example, having matzah on Pesach and sitting in a sukkah to remember that the clouds surrounded us. So it makes sense, but we need the Torah to tell us. So those are testimonies. So mishpatecha over here, David HaMelech uses the word, I remembered your laws. What is David HaMelech indicating to us? He's indicating as follows. That now more than ever we realize how much the mitzvot that Hashem has given us are mitzvot of Hashem, and we observe them because Hashem gave them to us, not because we understand them. Unfortunately, there are many people who have changed light for darkness and darkness for light, to quote one of the verses, and really messed up the focus of observing Torah and mitzvot properly. And therefore, we need to always stick to the divinity of the mitzvot in order to keep us in line. So, for example, in the Aseret HaDibrot that we read last week in the Parsha, we have simple, basic mitzvot. For example, don't kill, don't steal. Why do we need to have those as part of the Aseret HaDibrot? You're talking about such great mitzvot, keeping Shabbos, believing in one God, not believing in idols. And you have these simple, look, who doesn't know that you're not allowed to kill? Who doesn't know that you're not allowed to steal? So we learn from here And we see it today very clearly, how people can take something which should be very, very logical in the right path. But people can dig and find all kinds of insane reasons why not to do the right thing. Moreover, today people can just write a message on WhatsApp or on social media, and that becomes a fact. Just because one guy decided something. So that means that real ethics in the world needs to be based on divinity. If it says it in the Torah, then we know that it's not just based on human logic, rather it's based on Hashem. And once it's based on Hashem, then we know that we're going in the right direction. It's funny that at the end of this week's Parsha, Mishpatim, the Torah talks about Naaseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear, which means that really happened before the giving of the Torah last week. So why does the Torah at the end of this week's Parsha, after all the mitzvahs which are logical, again tell us about the Naaseh v'nishma? That's this message. The message is that we need to have, on one hand, a strong foundation, Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. That's last week's Parsha. This week's Parsha, we have Mishpatim, those mitzvahs, many of the mitzvahs, which are logical. We can understand them. We can relate to them. But at the end of this week's Parsha, Hashem gives us a reminder, almost like a sandwich. In the two outside, we have the Naaseh. We have the accepting upon ourselves the yoke of Hashem. In the middle, we have some Mishpatim. We have Nishma. We have the understanding. In other words, it's okay to understand. Hashem wants us to internalize the neshama, the meaning of the Torah. As long as you have a healthy foundation on one hand, and a healthy understanding, a realization on the other hand, that we're going to keep the mitzvahs and learn Hashem's Torah, whether or not we really understand it or not. We observe the mitzvot because they are Hashem's. And therefore, David the Melech says, Zacharti mishpatecha me'olam Hashem. I remember your laws of old, from way back, Hashem. Va'et nacham. And that gives me comfort. Because understanding that the Torah is our life and the foundation of our life, that is the best way to receive true comfort. Now let's move on to verse number 50. Nun. Nun is also a very important number, number 50 in Judaism and Kabbalah. Talk about the Chamishim Sha'arei Bina, the 50 gates of understanding. Usually we say that a human being cannot reach this on their own. The maximum of Kedusha that we can reach are the 49, the Memtet Sha'arei Kedusha, the 49 gates of Kedusha. Moshe Rabbeinu reached the 50th level when he passed away. That's why he was buried on the mountain Nevo, Mount Nevo. Nevo, 3 Hebrew letters, Nun, Bet, Vav. Nevo, which can be divided into 2 words, Nun, Bo, 50 in him. In other words, on the day that he passed away, he reached the highest level of 50, of the 50th gate. But it's not something that can be reached with an effort of a human being. He reached the 49 levels, and when he passed away, on the day that he passed away, he reached the highest level of 50. So now let's learn the verse number Nun. Zot nechamati va'ani. This is my comfort in my misery. Ki imratcha chiyatni. That your word revives me. So David HaMelech, as we know, and we learned also in the letters of, mainly in the letter Dalet, that David HaMelech had not such an easy life. Also following what we learned earlier about the fact that David HaMelech was the level of Malchut, like the level of compared to the moon. Sometimes there's ups and sometimes there's downs. So this is my comfort, David HaMelech says. This is my comfort and my misery, that your word revives me. Like we've spoken recently that the Torah is called Chayenu. Kihem Chayenu va'orech Yameinu. For they are our life and the length of our days. So David HaMelech receives life, Chayut, from the words of the Torah. Okay. Now we have a very interesting interpretation over here. David HaMelech says, Ki imratcha chiyatni. Imratcha literally is your saying, so to speak. Your saying. Which means your Torah, your word. Which means your words of Torah, chiyatni, give me life. Here's a beautiful concept. Every neshama, every soul is rooted in a letter of the Torah. This letter of the Torah is the individual's life force. When one is afflicted, one turns to Torah, and therefore the Torah rejuvenates the person. For some people, you can see it clearly. You can see how the Torah is such an inspiration for them, almost literally. So there are a couple of points that I'd like to explain over here. First of all, in 1981, the Rebbe came out with a campaign for Jewish children called Tzivot Hashem, the Army of Hashem. And the Rebbe established this worldwide organization, which is getting stronger and stronger, as the years go along, based in New York and Crown Heights. Now, one of the things that the Rebbe instituted then was the fact that we should write a Torah, and every child under the age of bar bat mitzvah should have a letter in the Torah. That is connecting the neshama of the child to the Torah. Moreover, the Rebbe said that the child should pay for the letter on their own. In other words, first of all, the Rebbe said it should only cost $1, or in every currency around that amount. So let's say over here, 3 to 5. I want to talk about how much the currency is right now, how much the dollar rate is over here, but Baruch Hashem, it's stabilizing, and 4 shekels, 5 shekels, whatever. So the parent gives a gift, so to speak, to the child, even if they're 1 day old, and the Rebbe wanted it should be only $1. And we send every child a certificate, which chumash, which parsha his letter is in. And I was a young child in 1981, and now they're finished. We finished almost 8 Torahs. In every Torah, there are over 300,000 letters. So there are millions of children, at least at the time of the writing of that individual Torah, that have letters in the Torah. Then in 1982, the Rebbe came out of Sefer Torah Klali, the general Torah. And just recently, I'm not sure exactly how many Torahs have been written, not only for children. And if you don't have a letter in the Torah yet, please let me know, and I will connect you to the people who are writing the Torah, and you can have a letter in the Torah. And so this concept is that everyone must have a letter in the Torah. Now, the idea of writing a Torah is a mitzvah in the Torah. We have to have a Torah. Not everybody can have the zechut of writing their own Torah, So by participating with other people, writing several words or a parsha or a chapter or a verse, you can participate with others in writing a Torah. And I'm happy for the first time to let you know that last week a very dear friend of ours told me they want to write a Torah for Chabad of Rechavia. And Bezrat Hashem, we are going to open it up to the community as well, giving everyone a chance to purchase either a letter or a word or a verse or a chapter or a parsha or an entire chumash in this Torah. And Bezrat Hashem, we're going to have a beautiful event which will be bringing in this new Torah into Chabad of Rechavia. So this is something which David HaMelech realizes, Ki imratcha chiyatni, for your saying, for your words, give me life. In fact, a week and a half ago, on Motzai Shabbat, it's customary to tell a story of a tzaddik, especially Baal Shem Tov. So by divine providence, a couple of days before our friend told me that he wants to write a Torah for Chabad of Rechavia, I read the following story to my wife and children. We read that there was once a plague in Mezhibuzh, the city of the Baal Shem Tov, a pandemic, and people were passing away, unfortunately, quickly. Hashem Yirachem. And they came to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov said, you should write a Torah. And in the merit of the Torah, the Magefa, the pandemic, will go away. That means that now, more than ever, it is so important to write a Torah. And how special it is to have a new Torah in Yerushalayim, written in honor and the zechut of the health of so many of our friends and family. So Bezrat Hashem, in the near future, we're going to start writing this Torah. And it will be finished in the next several months. In order that we should be able to bring it in, and we should be able to start using it in Yerushalayim as soon as possible. And it should bring bracha and blessing to all of us over here in Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael and around the world. Now, I would like to point out one more point. And that is that it says in the Talmud, Hachash b'rosho ya'asok b'Torah. If someone has a headache, they should learn Torah. By the way, it doesn't say lilmod Torah, it says la'asok, to really learn it as it's an occupation. If a person occupies himself with something, it's not just learning it, but it's delving into the depths of the infinite sea of the Torah. And there's a whole list of things over there in the Talmud. I believe it says if someone has a stomachache, they should learn Torah. So the famous question is, what does it mean learn Torah? It happens often that a person learns Torah and they don't necessarily become better. They don't necessarily feel better. So what does it mean that if someone has a headache or a stomachache or whatever, they should learn Torah? And the explanation is as follows, based on what we just learned here in this pasuk of pasuk nun. Every word of Torah gives us life. Now, every person has their part of Torah which is connected to their neshama. The riddle is to be able to figure out what part of Torah is connected to which person's neshama. That's a challenge, definitely. There are some tzaddikim which know clearly which part of the Torah is connected to their neshama. But nevertheless, we have to try to figure out, if possible, to learn as much of the Torah as possible, that hopefully one of those parts of the Torah are connected to us. But there's no question that at least in the bare minimum, understanding this point alone, understanding the concept that the Torah is our life, and learning the Torah, and having in mind while we're learning the Torah, that the Torah gives us life, hopefully that can bring us refuah, health, and Yeshua, salvation. Bezrat Hashem. And so, this is really all encapsulated in what David HaMelech says, Ki imratcha chiyatni, that for the words of your Torah are our source of life and rejuvenate us. Okay, now let's move on to Pasuk Nun Aleph, to verse number 51. We read as follows. Zaydim helitzuni ad ma'od. Though the wicked mocked me exceedingly, mitoratcha lo natiti. I do not veer from your Torah. Unfortunately, people that mock others don't realize the strong impact that they can have, the negative impact they can have on the other person. We talked about this at great length in the sermon this week on Shabbat, after the Torah reading. How much one can offend someone by even just saying a word that the offender may not think that it really offends a person. But by shaming a person in public or in private is one of the worst things that you can do to someone. So David HaMelech acknowledges the fact that the wicked are mocking him, and it's really difficult for him to keep up. Nevertheless, mitoratcha lo natiti. I do not move from your Torah. I will never move to the right or to the left. I will keep on the path of your Torah. Let's say the next verse, because we will try to connect these two. So let's move on to Nun Bet, 52. Zacharti mishpatecha me'olam Hashem. I remember your laws of old, Hashem, from ever. Va'et nacham. And I am comforted. So, the explanation that we're learning over here is as follows. That when the Risha'im, when the evil people mock me for following along the ways of your Torah and mitzvot, I do not move away from your Torah, which is me'olam, forever, from whenever, for as long as we can remember. Mehar Sinai, from the giving of the Torah, which we just read about in last week's parsha, the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, or afilu l'fnei briat ha'olam, even before the creation of the world. Zacharti mishpatecha, I remember and I strive to learn your mitzvot, va'et nacham, and I become comforted through your mitzvot from the mocking of those risha'im, of those evil people. In other words, the Torah was not only given at Har Sinai. The Torah was around way before Har Sinai. What's the proof? The proof is that we know that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov learned in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. They learned Torah. In Parshat B'Shalach, we have the mitzvah of Shabbat, and we have other couple of mitzvot here and there, even before the Torah was given. We know that Avraham had matzot, gave to the angels, and we know that it was Pesach, even before we went down to Mitzrayim, let alone going out of Mitzrayim. So there was the concept of observance of mitzvot even before the giving of the Torah. What does that mean? Wasn't the Torah given then? Answer is the Torah is way higher than the world. The Torah, the Medrash says, and it's explained in Chassidut, Alpayim shana kadma Torah liolam. 2,000 years, that's a quote. Doesn't mean literally. 2,000 years of Torah is before the world. It can't be literally because the whole concept of the world is time. So you can't, time was created 5,781 years ago. So you can't say before time, it's an oxymoron. So when it means 2,000 years, Alpayim Shana, that really means 2,000 levels, which is a very, very high level. It's the completion of Chachma and Bina. Well, we won't get into that right now. So the Torah is here way before. So when David HaMelech realizes that the Torah is here, me'azu me'kedem, or in the text of verse number 53. Actually, I was just joking, 52. It says, me'olam, forever. So then we know that there's no reason to be ashamed from those that mock a person from doing Torah and mitzvot. It's very sad if a person is mocking others for doing something so good. But putting that aside, the fact itself that David HaMelech realized that the Torah is our life. The Torah was here forever. In fact, the Torah, the Zohar says, the Torah is the blueprint of the world. So the world is built and based upon the Torah. So then that's a whole other scenario. Then there's no reason to be ashamed. There's no reason to be put down, because David HaMelech is comforted. He receives comfort from the words of the Torah. Let's move on to Pasuk Nun Gimel, verse number 53. Zal afa achazatni merishaim. I am seized with shivering because of the wicked, because of the Rishaim. Ozvei Toratecha, who forsake your Torah. Similar to the last couple of verses, that David HaMelech is complaining for the fact that people that have left the Torah, unfortunately, are mocking him. And how much he feels, how much he's taking it to heart. Zalafa is like a ruach sa'ara, like a bad wind, bad weather, or a difficult situation. So because David HaMelech realizes that these individuals are really giving him a difficult time, those that have unfortunately left the ways of Torah. So he says, the fact itself that they're there weighs down on me and hurts me, David HaMelech says. So he prays to Hashem that they should, their being of making it difficult for David HaMelech, that it should, the mocking should just stop, because after all we know that every single person has hope. There's no such thing as a person that doesn't have hope. So therefore, David HaMelech is focusing on the fact that they are mocking him, and so the moment Bezrat Hashem that they stop putting him down, then hopefully the whole scenario will change. At this point, we would like to finish off today's class. Tomorrow we have an amazing interpretation into the next verse of Nun Daled. So I look forward, Bezrat Hashem, to sharing with you a special shiur. And of course, Friday morning, Kabbalah Cafe. And this Shabbat, Friday is Rosh Chodesh, and Shabbat is Shabbat Rosh Chodesh. I really hope that everybody is going to join us for a beautiful, beautiful tefillah of Rosh Chodesh in the open area right next to Chabad of Rechavia. All of the best. Have a great day, and shalom, shalom.